As a state, I don't have a religion and I'll be neutral to all religions. That is the nature of our state. State has no religion. If there's a bureaucrat, you may be a practicing Muslim or a practicing Hindu in your personal life, but as a bureaucrat or as a judge, you will have no religion. By its very nature, a state lacks the expertise to either understand religion and therefore work with religion. A lot of our judicial principle and lot of our government functioning is based on, accepts the idea of belief, that you have a certain belief you will do it.
Yes.
I'll not get into it. Nobody accepts, nobody has as of yet functioned on the basis that there is an experience out there. I would say that our jurisprudence and our constitutional principles need to graduate into accepting this as a reality, that I have no expertise. As a state, which is executive, legislature or a court, I have no expertise in getting into that space.
Welcome. This talk that you're about to see, this interview with Anand Prasad, one of India's top lawyers and one of the smartest minds I've come across in my 8-9 years of running Sangam Talks. आज हमारी conversation, this was actually, the intent has been to look at articles 25, 26 and articles 21. This talk is in two parts. Pehla part actually talks about religions completely. What is the basis of religion? How does the constitution look at religion? उसमें कैसा उसका construct है, right? So what are the principles it's based on? It also looks at that when we say the word Hindu, is it only belief, faith, or is there more to religion? Is it more to being a Hindu? For instance, to us in lived reality, we believe in karma, we believe in past life, an endless amount of lives, endless cycle of birth and death. But Hamara state does not take into account any of these constructs that we Hindus live by, and that reflects in the constitution. So this was a talk about all of these things and how this construct impacts judgments like the Sabrimala case. Anand for a very long time has had a very different view of how, say, the Sabrimala case needed to be approached with the courts. What has happened now, he talks about it in the talk on why the Article 26 fundamental right for religious denomination got completely thrown away. He actually talks about what happened and why would the court take that stand. However unfair we may find this and that, but the court is looking at the law, at the interpretation of Articles 26, 25 and so on and so forth. And Anand is saying actually in the second part of the conversation is all about how there has to be movement now on the interpretation of Articles 25, 26 and how they actually need to be, and part 2b, how they actually need to be looked at par with Articles 21, which is about individual liberty and so on and so forth. It's a very long conversation, probably over 2 hours. We might break this up into 2 parts and release the first part where he establishes the basis of coming to articles, to the legal conversations of 25, 26 and then 21. They're all interconnected, but because the conversation is over 2 hours, we might break it up, because otherwise all of you don't like to watch long conversations. Certainly do watch this in 1.25, maybe 1.5 speed. And so yeah, please, it's one of the most important conversations you will come across on constitutional matters and what needs to change, how the dialogue in our minds and equally the minds of the state, which means the executive, the lawmakers, but also the law interpreters, which is the judiciary, how all of this needs to seep into consciousness of Indians, of Hindus, of the various institutions we have created across the spectrum. So do watch out, be patient, we'll have the transcript. and you may have to watch it multiple times. Please do watch it. Thank you. Namaste. Welcome to another edition of Sangam Talks and my sit-down sessions with great people who are doing wonderful work, intellectuals, advocates, activists from the community. Today I have Anand Prasad. Anand is a lawyer. He's a very dear friend, somebody who I've interacted with, argued with, and learnt a huge lot in the small long conversations at his office. Anand was the co-founder of Trilegal, one of India's largest legal firm. Eventually he went on to found a company called AP Partners, which he is a senior partner in, and is a corporate lawyer. The firm works in corporate law, and like I said, Anand is a dear friend. We've been having conversations on the role of state with respect to religion, the need for revisiting constitutional principles, the center and Indian states, what is their stand, which covers matters like temples and so on and so forth. Anand has touched upon Article 21 in our conversations, which pertain to individual liberties. Then, of course, Article 25 and 26 of the Constitution, which touches upon religious matters and so on and so forth. That's the purpose of our conversation today. I'll learn along and we'll keep interjecting Anand. If you have questions, please leave your questions and maybe we can have a follow-up session if I don't end up covering all of this subject. As you all know, I'm a software guy who's running Sangam Talks, and I'm a little bit of, not very astute in these matters. Anand, you'll have to explain a lot of this, and I'll keep interrupting you, keep asking you naive, silly questions. Excuse me for that, but please. We've talked about role of state, all the HRNC, ownership of temples, government ownership of temples, and so on and so forth. Please start anywhere.
The way I look at the Constitution and religion is a little different, and I would say that it is probably time for India to look at this sort of relationship differently. The early years had a certain perspective that came immediately after independence. It was on account of who we were at what point in time, what drove our philosophical perspectives at that point in time, and a lot of these issues got dealt with in the Indian courts, the high courts and the Supreme Court in a particular fashion, all very true to those judges doing exactly what they should be doing, true to that the sort of the construct of how a state and religion must engage with each other in those days. Very often it's become fashionable for many people, particularly in the right, to sort of be abusive of the court on the basis that they are anglicized or they are leftist, etc. But all somebody needs to do, this is lazy discussion, all somebody needs to do is to actually look at the court rulings. They appreciate every element of whatever anybody articulates today as an Hindu value.
Say more, please, on both the post-1947, some cases that you may be alluding.
So almost every case. Almost every case. I would say the only exception would be the massive Sabrimala judgment that came out recently. But if you look at a lot of the old Supreme Court cases from the 1950s, 60s, 70s, all of them get into what is Hinduism or what is religion. They talk about how it is a moving scale. They talk about how, on the one hand, Hinduism might be a complete belief system. On the other hand, it might resemble science. And then the various other elements in between. So it actually, in the manner that you would seek to do a description of what is an Hindu or what is Hindu tradition, you will find that debate across the board in various Supreme Court rulings consistently. But then and that probably comes from the personal experience of those judges.
Correct. So is it true that the court interprets maybe some basic questions, Hinduism as a way of life? which is
Including
not
as
this,
a way of life.
which is not this, not this, not this, and does it is.
Including as a way of life. So it is, if you read those judgments, it tells you that actually it's very hard to define what is religion. So they even get into what is religion itself, and very hard to define what is religion, and even harder to define what is Hinduism, because they say that there's so many moving parts.
They actually say that
They
it
actually
is
say
hard
that.
to define Hinduism.
They don't use the phrase hard to define, but if you sort of read through it, they actually say, some of them go to say that it's an umbrella of various religions or various religious traditions. So there is that recognition which today we have forgotten.
Okay.
So come the 2020s, all that is forgotten, all that wisdom is forgotten, but that wisdom actually exists, because we've also moved civilizationally in our philosophical thought process in a particular way, and as a result effort is not there. So we sort of look at somebody's description of what those court rulings did, which is a 2-liner or a 3-liner, which is probably the conclusions. Now what, despite doing all of that debate, the question is, why are we where we are when it comes to how a state must engage with religion? And I would say largely driven by, you look at what is our constitution, you look at a lot of our constitutional values and principles. Many of them are derived from other common law systems. So from around the world, whether it is the English system, the US, the Australian, the Canadian. So a lot of our interpretations, constitutional interpretations, lean on those interpretations from those. For example, I mean, I'll take in a non-religious context, I'll say, let's say you talk about what is freedom of speech.
Okay.
Or you will say, what is the freedom to life and liberty under 21. So all of these are viewed in the context. It's also true that we have got all these rights from those constitutions. So these are not homegrown. These are, let's take a step back. But how does the Constitution of India come into play? So they are two basic, I would say, legs on which the Constitution stands. One is how the state must run. When I say state, it is government, it is legislature, it is judiciary, and which sort of comes from the old English Government of India Acts that existed before independence. And then in that you put in something called the fundamental rights, which is a new one, which they sort of carved out from, or they evaluated various constitutions at that point in time. You look at the guys who wrote the constitution, all of them are English educated, are barristers. That is how we understand law. That's the context in which you wrote it. That is the formal element to it. There is also the element that's my formal training, but here is my personal experience living in my civilization. So for example, you will have some aspects being woven in there. If you look at the Constitutional Assembly debates, you will find some things of that nature also woven into the fundamental right chapter. But you will say that a lot of the underlying principles come from Western democracies, from whom we have sort of derived our constitutional principles. So you will find that the courts have taken that path, where there is a furious debate, state pulling on one side, common citizen pulling on the other side. So how do I interpret a certain right? And that is how constitutional principles have evolved. They have also, so that's now what is also the construct, and which is where I think that there is now room to start moving away from that particular construct. Our legal construct around the world, in most parts of the world, is based on our experience of the material world, which is the Newtonian world. It is the three-dimensional world. It is that world that you can touch and feel, and world that you can experience in more direct terms, that you can express without anybody being able to challenge that experience. That is our real world. That is how a lot of these principles have existed. When you describe this in scientific terms, you will say that there is the Newtonian world, which is a wall is a wall, a table is a table, a light is light. And then there is the quantum world, which is a wall is both a wall and a wave. Now, how do the two coexist simultaneously? If you look at almost every application in our existing, in the modern world, from your cell phone onwards to everything else, is derived on quantum principles. There is a greater realization today and a greater acceptance that we live in a multidimensional universe that follows certain kinds of quantum physics principles. Quantum physics principles are not very easy to comprehend completely. You will always see that there are elements of it which are left out.
And there are conflicting ones as well. Some people say multiple dimensions, some will say Big Bang, some will say now multiple bangs, infinite number of bangs constantly going on. All this is already moving parts. But I suppose what you're saying is that the real means the world that we see, touch and feel, sense, the Newtonian reductionist versus, you're talking about versus whatever else.
Versus the real world. Versus the real universe. So there is the reductionist material. This glass exists here. I can see it, you can see it, everybody
But the real universe, as we are now discovering, is actually far more complex and perhaps you're defining as quantum.
This is also a wave.
Yes.
Now, our minds cannot wrap around the concept that it is a wave. Now, our laws, when you talk in terms of human-made laws, function on the basis that this is a glass, this is a particle. It doesn't take into account that this is a wave, but there is also a wave. Yeah. It also doesn't take into account the fact that if this is a wave, then I have to accept the truth that I don't understand it fully. Yeah. Okay. Now, having said so, the question is, as somebody who frames a law, somebody who applies a law or interprets a law, do I have any option to actually think of the glass in any other term other than as a particle? Can I start analyzing it as a wave and then coming out with some other logic around the glass? The answer is a no. So I am, by my very nature, forced into thinking of a glass as a glass and not as a wave. And this holds good for almost everything that we do. Except when we talk in terms of scientific devices, you no longer think in those terms. You start thinking in quantum terms. Your mechanics run in quantum terms. When you talk in terms of theoretical physics, you again get into a realm which says these are possibilities and there is no way the human mind can comprehend everything in the universe. When you hear me say these things, you will hear lots of spiritual religious leaders talk in terms of how the human mind is incapable of comprehending beyond a certain level. It is not just in Hindu tradition, even in the biblical traditions, and they will say that you cannot understand the mind of God. So there is this acceptance that there is a reality in the universe that our minds will not be able to travel to. It is in the Hindu scriptures as well. In the debate between Shankaracharya and Bharati, basically there is a discussion which is Madana Mishra's wife. There is a debate over how beyond this, actually none of us can argue. So those concepts exist throughout. The reason why I bring this up in a constitutional context is we are looking to discuss the right of religion. And religion, I would say, is in this realm. Because all scriptures, regardless of whether they come from the Abrahamic world or the Hindu world or some other world, they all accept this reality that the human mind is incapable of traveling beyond.
And the current laws, systems, design of state theory, judiciary, all institutions, even the doctrine before that, none of this takes into account this variable.
They don't. So they take the easier path, which is a glass is a glass. This is the material world. If I drop this glass, it will only fall down. It cannot go up.
So, very interestingly, a side comment, but I was, I'm not a good reader, but every now and then I come across something nice and then read a few pages at least, and slowly maybe the whole thing. I just started reading Arthashastra, a very good translation. Chanakya writes that all kings and intellectuals, I don't know who he's saying this for, must go through an Veshiki, if I'm right about the term, which have 3 subjects. I'm forgetting the third, but he says Sankhya and Charvak. Charvak is all to do with material things, everything material. And while Sankhya goes into extremely high philosophy of the nature of cosmos and all of that. And so beautiful, right? Chanakya says, because of a right governance, you have to go through all of it together. And here we have designed a state which just completely ignores one huge part of our reality and looks at only the physical.
So,
Or
if I put it in
perhaps
those
Charmak.
terms, the way our laws work and the way our state functions is true to the Charvaka way of thinking,
Yes, correct.
which is it is true to the material world. It does not accept the reality of karma. It does not accept the reality or the possibility of karma even. It does not accept the possibility of multiple lifetimes.
Of an Atman, exactly.
Nothing. So it basically says this is your one life, you need to maximize this one life, and therefore the principles of fairness all operate in these terms. I mean, so all our state is framed in these terms. So that is kind of where we are. If you look at religion, and you will see that the legal debate and even otherwise, the language also, when we talk in terms of English, we use those kinds of languages. So if you talk in terms of, let's say, all Christian driven since we were British ruled, they will say belief. So they will say faith. So the question will be, what is your faith? You will say, my faith is Hindu. Or what is somebody's faith? So somebody will say, my faith is Christianity or Christian. So we term our word for what you do is structured in that term, faith, because for the Christian, faith is the primary character of their religion. And therefore everything is viewed. So when you look at public discourse, this is not only court, you look at public discourse, intellectual discourse, you look at journalists doing interviews on television, everybody will use the term faith. Or what is your belief? So again, belief is somebody will ask you, what do you believe in? So let's say that I say that I'm a Sri Vidya Upasaka. So somebody will say, oh, so you believe in Sri Vidya. So the language that we use is belief. And therefore, when you look at constitutional principles and the language used in a lot of judicial precedent, you will find that they are essentially based on the construct that humans believe in the idea of God. You will also see, this is something that we learned from school. Why does God come into existence? So the normal thinking, right from the time when we were in school and continues to be the debate, is humans wanted to look for a father figure. Somebody was stronger than them.
Yeah, nature was stronger, so you had fear, so you created God.
So you created, as if God was, there was a need to create God and you created God.
Yeah.
That is the construct in which...
That is a scientific construct. There is a biblical construct which is all over us, which is about faith and all of that, and there is a Lord.
So I would say that is not a scientific construct, that is logic being taken to that level. There is no science to it. There's just logically you're saying, all right, this is... I love my father is benevolent, he provides for me.
Newtonian science, if I may say.
Correct. And therefore I need this, so how do I deal with the possibility of thunderbolt falling on me? So then I sort of take it further. So I look for somebody who's bigger than my father, village headman, king, emperor, then go beyond.
Two streams here. One which ridicules your belief systems and hence gives logic such as this, which is your belief in God must be because you are fearful.
Correct.
And the other is that because there is a clock, so there must be a clockmaker.
So correct,
those two constructs.
Correct. Both of those, and you will see that this is essentially coming from people that both why the idea of God exists and the people who believe that God exists, and the normal conversation for even those that you would call God-fearing or believers is somewhere in the back of the mind there is the possibility that the reason why I believe in God is that I started looking for a father figure. Our entire legal interpretation, the way I'll say the way the state is constructed, and I'm not talking about other aspects of how the state was put together, I'm talking about how the state in the context of religion was put together, follows this logic, is that human beings created, there was a need for the existence of God, and you went about creating the idea of God.
And help me understand that the constitutional debates, there were some, I hear some really big scholars, including rooted in Dharma, All of these nuances were not part of the debates that time, and was their view also very English and very.
So think of, I'll give you an example. It's an example that many people find slightly difficult to digest. So when you say people rooted in dharma and they make this argument, I'll give you an example of people rooted in dharma.
I don't know how else to say it, but yeah, please.
So I'll give you an example exactly of this. And what I'm trying to describe is how a mindset exists today. Okay. That despite we thinking that I am a dharmic person, how my mind is set in a certain different context. Right. So I'll give you an example. There is no doubt that today our state is run by the BJP, or there's a BJP government at the center. There's a ultra-right Prime Minister. Most people will say, I know that you may have a slightly different view, but you'll say that Hindu Prime Minister. Yes, so clearly Hindu, wear Hinduism on his sleeve. Come the pandemic, our Prime Minister functioned on the basis that we have one life to live, and that must be preserved at all cost. Okay. He did not accept the truth that the Hindus will live multiple lifetimes. Yeah. So what I am trying to say, and that was also civilizationally, regardless of how dharmic people were, we ran around as if we came from a religion that believed in one lifetime.
This is a very important point that Anand is making, and there is a very highly viral short snippet of Professor Kapil Kapoor in conversation sitting like this, where he actually said, when Al-Biruni, if I'm not wrong, was traveling through India, and then he's writing in his diary, in his notes, he writes that these Hindus are very different from us in 3 ways. They don't lie, they are extremely proud of their knowledge, and he berates Hindus that itne proud hai, they're so proud that they think everybody else is like, ridiculed, inko kuch nahi aata hai types, so that lot of extreme pride. And third, that they're not scared of death. I mean, this is what he's observing widespread all over India, and he's noting that these guys are different from us in 3 ways. And they're not scared of death, not because we are throwing our bodies around, but because we know that we'll come back. So this is only a passing body. So sorry, Anand, just wanted to.
So it's not only we'll come back, that I am one of the coming backs. I have existed before. Yeah. And I have lived multiple lifetimes. This is just one of those. Yeah. And I will live many more lifetimes. My question is, however dharmic, and you have met many dharmic people, how many people actually live their lives according to that principle? Yeah, sure. Do you actually function today on the basis that, think about the number of dharmic people that you have met? My point is, it's not their fault. The point that I'm trying to make is that over the centuries, and you could call it Kali Yuga, we have lost that sense of we are in a transitory life. That is not our reality. We talk, when we say dharma and dharmic principle, we are thinking modern day law. So our understanding of dharma is also, you trade the English word law for dharma, which is not the truth. So dharma is a lot bigger. Dharma applies across your lifetimes. There is no concept of justice in that clear sense. I'll give you a completely different perspective in terms of, and we don't normally think like that. All Hindus will say that, vast majority, unless you're slightly more Charvaka or left oriented, you will say that God is omnipresent. An omnipresent God means that God should exist even in evil.
Yes.
God should exist in the plunderers that came to India. The act of plundering and destroying the temples was also an act of God. Yes. But we don't actually think of it like that. While on the one hand we say that God is omnipresent and everything is God and everything is Maya, but or everything is Shiva or Brahman, whichever way you might call it. But it's not our reality that the plunderer was also part of divinity. We
Because the common language is that, oh, God is on our side, and all sides say the same thing. Muslims,
Correct.
for example, keep saying nothing moves without the wish of Allah. Then why blame Hindus? Everything is with the wish of Allah. He's
Correct.
only whacking everybody around.
Correct.
Why-
so while this concept exists across the board in various religions,
But this is not our concept at all, actually.
but that is not our concept at all. Our concept would be, and here people not agree, so there will be a lot of challenge to what I say now.
Of course, because it's become
Is that it is my karma. It is a karmic debt. It's a civilizational karmic debt that results in this. It is.
That's
it
the
is.
best answer I've got to why we were plundered.
So it is debt. It is you. We are also part of the same Brahman. And what we do civilizationally and what the rest of the universe does, or the world does civilizationally, plays out in a certain manner. It is that play. This is not a reality.
Yeah.
So we don't think in these terms. We don't live our lives in these terms. When we are critical of somebody, we are not thinking like that. Let's say if I talk more in tantric terms, I'll say that Shiva is the potential energy. That's not, and Devi is, or Shakti is the dynamic aspect. Devi's movement in Shiva is what creates us. She creates the good and the evil both. So they are just manifestations. They just get created on account of our existence, and therefore evil is also Devi. Now we are not thinking like that. And I would say that it's not that we should start thinking like that. I am saying that there is also the reality of all of us. So Devi is played out in a manner that each of us believes that
which
we
is
are
the
the
devas and
etc.
asuras, all of that actually is part of our. But we somehow have been trained to think that asuras are the other and outside and somehow not part of the conscious
Are
of
the
the
evil.
creation.
Our understanding of Asura has also become very Christian in its orientation. So we good guys and the bad guys. And not sort of, we completely tend to dish examples of the so-called bad guys also had lots of good guys, and the so-called good guys also did a lot of terrible things.
I mean, I believe Shankar Bharadwaj was telling me Surya Siddhant was written by an asura, I forget his name, I don't recall. But I mean, some of the biggest scholars of the texts that have been written have been what is classified as asuras. I don't fully
The
understand all
greatest
this.
bhakta of Vishnu is, if you take Narada out of the equation, is Prahlada. Lots of people in India are named Prahlada. So you're named after an asura. So this is the construct in which we have been operating. This is the construct in which, however dharmic we are, this is the way we look at it. And therefore, I would say that a lot of our perspective today, and that is the way the state operates, that is the way the courts interpret what is there in the constitution and the law, is in this construct of our material real world. Let's therefore now get to the specifics of two constitutional provisions. One is Article 25, which is the right to religion, and the other is Article 26, which is the right to your religious institutions. If you look at 25 has a basic, now both these 25 and 26 have concepts that say that the state can interfere in matters of religion or in the manner in which you administer a religious institution on the basis of public health, morality, etc. So there are three exceptions that apply, which basically is, so those I'll describe why I think that those become relevant. And it says specifically when it comes to 25 2b, it talks about how Hindu temples how the state can legislate to sort of take around discrimination, entry restrictions, etc. So it is reform. So how can the state do reform? But the underlying, with these exceptions out, you would say that the underlying principle in both 25 and 26, I'll first deal with 25. 25, which is the right to religion, or to propagate your religion, to practice and propagate your religion, is that the state shall not interfere. That is the right to religion as against right to a religious institution, which is in 26. So a right to religion is available to every citizen. or every person, in fact, it travels beyond citizen. So the question is, why does the Constitution actually say that? So we don't ask ourselves that question. I have looked through court rulings, I have not actually found that. So here is my hypothesis of why it says so. One is the principle that religion is a matter of belief, and who am I to challenge anybody's belief unless there is a real reason, real material reason to get into that belief. So if you are discriminating, and if there are if there's a public crisis, there's a health emergency, so there's COVID, you need to stop people going to temples, etc. Those are situations where you can interfere as state. But otherwise, you should not get into it, because who am I? If you have a certain belief, what gives me the right to actually get into that? The second, so that is the underlying principle. The second is a principle that's not often talked about in the context of religion. It's talked about in the context of courts reviewing government decision making and policy. It is, do I have the capability of doing it? So it is down to capability. Does the state have the capability of interfering in religion? Now I'll give you the constitutional principle which comes in another context. It is, can a court interfere with government policy making? Whether it is economic policy, whether it is some other form of policy, can the consistent court ruling has been, and from the time of independence, it has been that a court does not have the expertise to evaluate whether a certain economic policy is good or bad. All I need to do is to make sure that there is no bias, there is no corruption which vitiates that policy. But I don't have the ability to say whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. Whether India should have good relations with Pakistan or not is not for a court to decide. Whether Indian economic policy should be left oriented or right oriented is not for the court. Whether India's telecom policy should be of, or when it comes to 2G spectrum allocation should be A or B, is not for the court to get into. But in the 2G case, they got into it because they believed that there was bias and there was mala fide. So there was basically bribery and corruption, and that's where they got into it. But if you cannot prove, or if you cannot bring about the aspect of bias, prejudice, bribery, corruption, one of those malicious things, a court will not get into it, because it's the view, the constitutional perspective has been, the courts lack the expertise. Environmental policy, court lacks the expertise.
And this is acknowledged.
This is acknowledged. This is consistent law. So unless there is some mala fide that is attached to policy, you will not get into policy, because the court accepts that I do not have the expertise. Okay. I would say when it comes to a matter of religion, the state lacks the expertise in terms of religion. So I now come to, there is an aspect of religion. One is belief. And most people logically can understand belief. You've got, it's like you like Shah Rukh Khan as a movie. How can I get into the fact of why you like Shah Rukh Khan? Or you like a gulab jamun? How can I say you should like a rasgulla, not a gulab jamun? Matter of individual preference. How do I get into it? I can't. So one is respecting that belief, respecting your reason to either want or not one thing, and therefore I will not interfere in it. So that is one of the reasons why they will not interfere in religion. You like religion A, you like religion B, you like to practice religion C. Who am I to tell you what you should do? So that is just respecting that individual's right. It is in the nature of, you have a liberty under Article 21. I am nobody to interfere with that liberty. So I will not get into it. So that's the reason why 25 is written in one way. One of the reasons. Other reason is no expertise. As a secular institution, and this is before our preamble was inserted to insert secular, India has always been viewed, court rulings say that we are a secular state, even without the word secular. So we have always been, and as a people and as a civilization, we are secular. We are not sort of, we don't say one thing over the other. So we have always been secular. That is our very character. Secular has two elements, two ways of looking at the term. Secular is, as a state, I don't have a religion and I'll be neutral to all religions. That is the nature of our state. State has no religion. If this is a bureaucrat, you may be a practicing Muslim or a practicing Hindu in your personal life, but as a bureaucrat or as a judge, you will have no religion. You will function and you will take decisions in a material context, in the Newtonian context. You will not bring in your multidimensional experience into what you do. So you are expected to function in a secular, non-religious manner, and therefore, by its very nature, a state lacks the expertise to either understand religion and therefore work with religion, because religion, one is the belief element, the other is there are lots of people for whom religion is a matter of experience, and this is true for all religions. They are Muslims that will have some experience of divinity, there are Christians that have experienced the divinity, and there are Hindus that have experienced the divinity. Nobody can explain it in very clear terms. The reason why they can't explain it in clear terms, if I were to describe it in a different manner, is that it is akin to saying that I have normal sight, I can see the color green. I am now sent to a blind school and I am now asked to explain to the students over there what is the color green. What are the different shades of green? How much of blue and how much of yellow will make this shade of green? How do I explain it to blind people? So, unless you have personal experience of green and the different shades of green, you cannot comprehend it. Because a state is secular, it by its very nature is incapable of comprehending those elements of religion, because it is like a blind student. And therefore, I will not get into a debate whether this is dark green or this is light green or this is blue actually. So don't get into that, because you're incapable of making that determination.
I mean, maybe this is not relevant, but I'm not sure if the court or the state actually states that there is something called a religious experience.
So I'll come to that.
Don't even think that it
recognizes that. So a lot of our judicial principle and lot of our government functioning is based on, accepts the idea of belief, that you have a certain belief you will do it.
Yes.
I'll not get into it.
It is.
Nobody has as of yet functioned on the basis that there is an experience out there.
Yeah.
Which is why I started with the multidimensional world, with the quantum world. There's a world out there which you can't actually fully comprehend.
Yeah.
Now this experience is in that world, as I would describe it.
Yeah.
You cannot, unless you have had that experience yourself, and you will need to have an identical experience, because if you had a slightly different experience and somebody else has a different experience, you can't understand it. But if you have had that experience, it would be safe to say that you will accept the truth that there can be that sort of experience.
Yeah.
And you will therefore stay out of judging whether the next person's experience is right or wrong.
Correct.
I would say that our jurisprudence and our constitutional principles need to graduate into accepting this as a reality, that I have no expertise. As a state, which is executive, legislature or court, I have no expertise in getting into that space. I cannot. That is I'm constructed for a material world, and therefore I will leave that out of the equation. I will not get into a judgment over there. So while till date we have accepted for Article 25, reason why state shall not interfere in religion, the underlying principle of belief, I would say that it is now time to add, and as we start pushing away from the Kali Yuga, we need to accept the truth that there is this other multidimensional universe, there is this quantum world, there are people that have experiences that come from that multidimensional world. And Article 25, when it talks about religion, it actually functions both in this world as well as the quantum world. You must specifically recognize that I do not have the ability to deal with what is fair or unfair in the quantum world, and therefore stay out of it completely, because I lack the capability.
You're saying it currently does not, Article 25 currently does not, has no cognizance even that there is a potential of religious experience.
Correct. As of date, nobody has recognized this as a reason, that the lack of expertise as a reason.
Yeah. Okay.
It has always been subliminal. I think nobody has ever wanted to get into that debate. But it is now time for India to graduate to accept these realities as well. These are our civilizational realities. It is not about the mundane, random stuff that we do in terms of puja and going to temples and doing Diwali. There are those are also our realities, but our realities extend far beyond it.
And this is the foundation based on which all of everything else is built to make it a reality for us.
Our foundation. Multiple lifetimes, multi-dimensional universes, the truth that we will not understand it. So when you look at 25, you look at it in this. Now the question is, in 25, therefore does it mean that anything that comes into matter of religion that you must not get into it? Accept also the reality that Devi has created our material world. Her functioning has resulted in our existence. Our existence as of today in this Kali Yuga is also her doing. We have a set of laws and a set of constitutional principles that exist, also her doing. How do I therefore, given my reality, accept that this is also my reality? While the quantum reality is reality, this is also my material reality, is also my reality. How today in my reality will I accept ideas of public morality, something that is acceptable, that is digestible by the people, and make it work? It is not permanent. What I work in my constitution is for today. What is palatable to my people today. So if I start saying today that A, B, C, D cannot get into a temple because you don't belong to this jati, unacceptable today. Therefore, the constitution must recognize its unpalatability regardless of how it might play out in the quantum world. Then you leave it to your karmic equation to balance out how it plays out. But today's truth is that discrimination on this basis is not acceptable. I mean, if you ask me, in terms of the Manusmriti, I would fall squarely under the category of a Chandala. A Chandala should not get into this debate.
That's not true, by the way, but we'll leave that. For your argument's sake, I'll accept it, but based on the your mother and father, and I had a very interesting conversation with Dr. Kundan Singh who explained that, so it is different.
I saw that, so I differ from his view, but in terms of, you ask most Brahmins, most Orthodox Brahmins, you say that parentage is so and so, they'll say Chandala. That's basic standard. Chandala is not, we think of it in a certain term today, but that's just who you are genetically. And therefore, I should not get into this debate. But today's reality is that a Chandala, it is Kali Yuga, so a Chandala can get into this debate. A Chandala challenged Adi Shankara on the footsteps of the Ganga, and Adi Shankara then bowed down to him. Shiva is a Chandala, which is why his first wife's father never accepted him. So there is, Chandala has various aspects too. But so those are the kinds of things that in our existing world are unacceptable from a public morality perspective. And therefore, regardless of how in the ancient times or the medieval times or how the temple systems grew, whether they grew on energy principles or what kinds of energies must come to a certain space in the temple, etc., to a certain degree you will accept that energy principle, but not beyond. Also, we don't function in terms of energy principles anymore. Very often we are lakir ka fakir. So somebody is written down a set of rules to sort of protect those energy principles. We just blindly follow the rule. We have no comprehension of the underlying energy principle. That's how our temple systems operate. That's how our religious systems operate. That is how our caste system or varna system or jati system, whichever phrase you might want to use for it, operate. There's also the reality of real oppression that exists for various people. That is their truth. There is no running away. You can't cite ancient varna system to say this is people are fooling themselves. Nobody's fooling themselves. This is our truth. If we don't accept our truth, we will not get to solutions. Completely, I'm diverging from the issue, but I'm coming to this constitutional principle that allows the state to legislate on, particularly it focuses on Hindus, that exception, saying that entry into Hindu shrines, etc., state can get into and legislate on things like that. So you will have it is fair for the constitution, I would say, to have these carve-outs for the state to interfere, to reflect our modern day reality, which is anti-discrimination, fair play, look at public order, look at morality, look at those things, and therefore legislate and limit the sort of the religious principles accordingly. All I would say is every time you do that, you need to look at the religious traditions, its underlying basis, and balance it when you take that decision. That is part of your job. Do not ignore this and just go by modern mechanical functional Newtonian world principle, which is my view. What happened in the Sabrimala judgment is that there was no balance. You did not take into account the reality of Sabrimala, the energy principles that apply in Sabrimala, the quantum principles that might apply. You just went by what in the modern Newtonian world will be a fair thing and an unfair thing.
But there was conversation, just to stick on Sabrimala, there was conversation about Ayyappa being a brahmachari. So, I mean, that still goes into, Ayyappa is not a human being as us as a human being, right? He's probably in another realm, he's a devata and a brahmachari. So, is there recognition of what is a devata?
So, I'll tell you, the people who argue that he's a brahmachari, do they have recognition of what it means in the context of Ayyappa? Yeah. So, the problem is, like I said, it is true for all of us. Our understanding has grown in a particular fashion. It is not our fault. That is our time.
Correct.
That is how we have gone to, and therefore, if I argue it in a particular manner, it will have a certain outcome. That's, I'll leave it at that for the moment.
Okay.
But coming back to 25.
All I was saying is that, I mean, the courts do seem to have some recognition, right? Somewhere that there are some principles which we don't quite understand, which is in...
No.
That is still in the context of belief.
That's in the context of belief.
Not in the context of experience
It's
or
not,
energy.
it's
or
not.
Okay, got it.
So that's my point, is that it says this is your belief.
Yeah.
Actually, I don't like your belief. Your belief is rubbish in this context, so therefore it's out.
Yeah, got it.
So belief has little worthiness.
Yeah.
But
it's unfair, no? Sidelining this, but it's unfair because
So
not only because Hindus are the only ones targeted, but all belief in the Quran and all sorts of things gets sanctioned.
No,
that is not challenged.
So not necessarily true. You will see that when the review petition, there are some Islamic principles that are coming in for challenge, etc. So there are various. Okay. The court does a balancing act.
Okay.
It is their job to do. Sometimes they'll get the balance right. Sometimes they'll get the balance wrong. Here is my other reality. Is that in my world, as I describe it, which is multiple lifetimes, whatever you do, you have a karmic consequence to it. You get that balance wrong as a court, there is a consequence to it. So, I am not unduly perturbed by the fact that a court goes one way or the other. It is, you do your job, I'll continue to exist. You will pay the price for, if you end up, whether on account of prejudice or on account of fairness. I mean, when Dashratha killed Shravan Kumar, he thought there was an animal over there. He didn't try to kill a man, but there was a consequence for him. This is a civilizational reality. Whatever you do, there will be a consequence. Your intent is irrelevant. You will function in a particular manner, there will be a consequence to you, either in this lifetime or the following.
But the intent is relevant also in the context of a man killing. Just for clarity, I know where you're coming from, but a murderer kills a man for stealing money and a army guy kills another army guy. The intent is what matters.
So
the motivation.
So dharmic principle. Yeah. A murderer kills somebody in pursuit of a certain dharmic idea. The Thuggees, for example, it is a religious concept. So it will have a different implication for him. So when you think of it in these terms, these are not equal. So it's very hard for anybody who's a judge in any of these matters, because you are living in your modern reality. There are a whole host of people that are going to criticize you one way or the other. It doesn't matter where you put your foot, somebody will always
especially all
be
this
there
will
to
be
hack
called
it.
Humbug and all of that and ridiculed totally in any context outside of India, for example.
So you take a court, when it gets into this religious debate, wherever a poor court goes, there's somebody to hack against it. All I will say is, all I will push for the court to actually do the decisions on the basis that accepting these realities is that it's not only belief, it's more than belief. Only I don't have one lifetime, you also have, or I don't have multiple lifetimes, you also have multiple lifetimes. Your decisions will weigh on your future, my decisions, or it may be it comes because of something that happened in the past. I don't know whether karma is playing out or new karma is getting created. I'm not good enough for that. But these are my realities. So I accept these realities, I function, these are the quantum realm as I would put it. So coming to 25 once again, I would say 25 therefore, without anybody having articulated in those terms, imbibes in it the need for the state to stay out of religion. And I would say the stay out of religion not only because you want to respect people's beliefs, which has been the way it has been interpreted, but also because you do not have the capability of doing it. You are incapable of understanding and appreciating religion.
On the experience side.
On the experience side. Now, also what happens very often is to deal with this lack of experience, because we go by normal judicial approaches. Bring in an expert. So I don't understand environment, bring in an expert on environment. I'll examine, let him put on affidavit. So bring in experts, we start relying on experts. But when it comes to experts, we very often, and I may bring in a priest. He's got a title, he's supposed to have education. Why shouldn't he have? But it's not necessary the priest have the experience. He may be functioning mechanically.
Correct.
Because in the Hindu tradition, in the tantric tradition, you can without experience function mechanically and it'll happen.
Yes.
So I don't need anything, I'll just function mechanically. So when you say call in this expert, I may call in an expert from one tradition, but he is actually not good enough to opine on another tradition. I may call in a person from one tradition and he may not be good
one
enough
Hindu
to
tradition,
one
not
Hindu
only
tradition,
between the
not Hindu
two umbrellas.
Same. He may not even be good enough to explain his own tradition. And lastly, even if he understands this tradition very well, he is incapable of articulating it to the lawyer because the lawyer is operating in one realm, and incapable of articulating it to you.
That's the same green or the taste
It is
of
the
honey.
same green. Which shade of green is there? He doesn't know how to express it. He is not trained in expressing. He's trained in experiencing the green. He doesn't have training in terms of articulating it to you or persuading you to understand that it is this version of green. That training simply does not exist. So this whole method of how we do lawyering and how justice is delivered by judges calling in experts does not work in the context of religion, because it is in a realm that is incapable of comprehension and it is incapable of being expressed by the expert even when the expertise is there, even when the experience is there. You cannot explain it. So you have to accept that reality. So that is 25.